Hebrews chapter 12. We finished chapter 11, but as you will see, hopefully, as we get into the text, you will see that chapter 12 does not change our thought, our context, our topic at all. But to understand chapter 12, we need to review just quickly what chapter 11 is about. And so what was chapter 11 about? What is the sole topic of chapter 11? Faith. And it is illustrated through multiple Old Testament characters. Okay? Each one begins the description how? By faith. By faith they lived their lives. By faith they accomplished great things. By faith they endured terrific hardships, persecutions. All of it by faith. And the encouragement or the instruction is for us to live that way as well. Now we've just come through, as stated, a tragic incident that puts our faith to the test. Okay? And we have one of two choices. Which way are we going to go with that? But that faith is put to the test. And life does that. So, in the book of Hebrews, just a little bit broader, I'm still having a hard time seeing Martin over here. Yeah. The book of Hebrews is all about first century Christians who are struggling with what they believe. Struggling to the point where they're saying, contemplating, we'll say thinking about quitting. Thinking about or the statement is, it's not worth it any longer. I'm going to give up. I'm going to quit. And the writer of the book of Hebrews spends all of these chapters encouraging them. It is worth it. The key word is what? Help me out. Better. What's better? Jesus. Jesus is a better sacrifice. Jesus is a better high priest. Jesus institutes a better covenant. Don't go back to second rate. Stay with what is better. And we're going to look at that today. So, in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, actually we'll probably get, hopefully, I'll get right up front. I'll probably be a little short in the Sunday school lesson and make up for it in the service. Okay? Although, to my defense, I won't talk in the introduction as long as Pastor John, so I'm going to give myself some more time for the sermon. Okay? You're not telling him I said that. So Hebrews chapter 12 starts this way. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Who's that referring to? Completely, explicitly. Who's it referring to? Come on. Wake up and think with me. Who's it referring to? Who did we just talk about in chapter 11? All those individuals of faith. Those are our witnesses. Here's the key word. I'm going to spend a lot of time here. Key word is witness. The great cloud means multiple. I mean, we looked at individuals, but even in chapter 10 he said, time and space won't even allow me to cover everybody. There's a huge cloud of witnesses. But what does the word witness mean? Here's an interesting. The Greek word means martyr. What's a martyr? Someone who dies or suffers, typically dies, for their faith. That's literally the meaning of the Greek word. We're going to give it some more meaning. What is a martyr? Not a martyr. What is a witness? He was there. Someone was there. He saw it, heard about it, and he testifies about it. Either verbally, think about a court case. Have you ever been involved in a court case, or you ever sat in a courtroom just for the fun of it? Anybody ever do that? No. But they call witnesses up, right? And they say, tell us what you saw. Tell us what you've heard. Tell us what you experienced. And they give, what's the very first thing they do to a witness?
Swears in it.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Okay? So they're sworn to tell the truth about what they saw, heard, and experienced. And this is what these witnesses are here for. We just looked at them. Their lives are the witness, the testimony. They live by faith. Now I'm going to throw a question to you, and I want to see what your answers are. Do the dead that have gone on before us who are in heaven, do they watch what we do? Pretty sure in heaven. But are they standing? We have this idea, which is taught from pulpits, that those who died and gone on before us are in heaven, standing on the edge of heaven, looking over and looking at us on earth. And
why does the Bible say the dead in Christ shall rise if they're already in heaven?
okay, that's the rapture. The dead in Christ shall rise first in the bodily resurrection in the rapture. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Okay. Is their body, physical body, going to be resurrected?
Yeah.
Kind of, to a glorified body. But it's going to be a glorified body. It's not going to be the same physical body. Okay? There's a lot of questions about that. Will we be, I'm off topic, but I'm coming back. Will we be recognizable in heaven?
Maybe.
Will we maintain our individuality in heaven?
Yes.
I think so. I think we'll be recognizable. I think we're going to look like we look. Some of us, that's too bad. Others are okay. But I don't know. I can't give you a chapter and verse. How old are we going to be in heaven?
Ageless.
Okay? But I say that because I believe.
Checking on our speculation.
Yeah, I'm checking. But I believe that babies are covered by the blood till an age of accountability. Okay, I'll even go one step further. I believe aborted babies will be in heaven as well. Because they're an individual created in the image of God. Never been born, never experienced life, but they are still a unique individual created by God. Is heaven, and I'm way off topic, but is heaven going to be filled with a bunch of babies? So how old are they going to be?
Prime of life.
So, okay, prime of life. So let's say, conversely, you're 95 years old and your health is deteriorated. Are you, when you get to heaven, are you going to be 95 years old? I don't know, but it makes me think. Prime of life. Okay, I'll tell you what I've read. How old was Jesus when he was crucified and resurrected and ascended to heaven?
33.
In his early 30s. Martin, prime of life. I wish I was in my early 30s. I can tell you when I was in that age, I felt a lot better than I do now. But it happens. But is that going to be the prime age? I don't know. There's no... But heaven, why do the dead rise first when they're already in heaven? To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Well, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, it's dealing specifically what we as believers term the rapture, which is the next event on the prophetic calendar. What's preventing the rapture?
God's timing.
Souls being saved. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9. But when the rapture happens, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, in an instant, can't snap my finger, either one, in an instant we're changed. This mortal must put on immortality. This corruption, physical flesh, must put on incorruption. And we become changed to a glorified body. What's a glorified body? Okay, I'll give you. When Jesus, after the resurrection, the disciples are gathered in the upper room for secrecy, what happens? Jesus appears to them. He has no physical limitations. Interestingly enough, in a glorified body, on the Sea of Galilee, John chapter 21, Jesus eats with them. But he does not have the physical limitations, like he appears through the wall. He disappears through the wall. There's no physical limitations. Why does it say in that rapture there's going to be a unification of that soul back to a body, and we'll all be together with the Lord? If we are alive, it says, and remain, we will be changed instantly in that process too. But the dead are going to go first. So are all the graves going to be opened? You can go to a cemetery and there's going to be multiple graves unearthed? I don't probably think so. I think it'll be a spirit reuniting. But they're already in heaven. So, good question. At least we're thinking. So back to my original question. Are the saints in heaven overlooking earth concerned about what's going on?
I think they're glorifying God.
Okay? Think they're glorifying God, worshiping God, praising God. Are we going to have jobs in heaven? What are they going to be? Fulfilling. Okay? So, I've actually had an individual tell this to me. I don't know if he was completely honest or a little bit facetious, but he said, heaven sounds like it's going to be pretty boring. I said, well, hell sounds like it's going to be really terrible. So, I don't think we're going to be bored. I don't think we're going to be, as the picture is with angels' wings playing harps. I guess harps just strum, you know, doing violins. But I think we'll be busy in heaven, worshiping God, and having jobs to do, whatever they are. I don't believe the saints in heaven are busy looking over earth. I know I mentioned it, well, maybe not even too long ago. If we could interview somebody who is in heaven, which we can't, but if we could interview someone who is in heaven, they don't want to come back. That's a clear statement. Back to my question about will we be identifiable in heaven? In Luke 16, which is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus who died, the poor beggar, taken to Abraham's bosom, which is a picture of heaven, and the rich man who died and is in hell. He looks, and it's a story, but I believe it's a true story. Parables do not use individuals by name. In this story, Jesus uses Lazarus by name. The rich man in hell looks up somehow and sees Abraham, calls him by name, Father Abraham, and then he says, send Lazarus. So I believe we'll be identifiable in heaven. That rich man in hell could see and knew clearly who those people were. Anyway, go back to Hebrews. Now I gotta hurry. A great cloud of witnesses whose lives testify of their faith, and their faith sustained them. Remember, as we looked last week, the end of chapter 10, by my glasses, the end of chapter 10, some of the things that they accomplished. Verse 33, subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. All of this by faith. Faith is what sustained them. Out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. And others, this is what they endured, torture, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trials of cruel mocking, scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, sawn asunder, tempted, slain with the sword, wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, afflicted, tormented. What sustained them? Faith. Their faith in God. God is worthy to be trusted. Okay. Now, the end of chapter 1, or verse 1, chapter 12, gives us an analogy. What's an analogy? An example, a comparison. Here's an example, comparison, all throughout the New Testament. Life is a race. What's a race? You go to a track meet, watch a track meet. What's a race? It's a competition. It's a course. Set course. You know, we go to a track meet and they run around this track so many laps. I've often wondered, well, if you really wanted to win, you just run about halfway across and then straight across the field, right? Shortcut. But there's some rules in there. There's some parameters that we have to stay within. Life is a race. Anybody a sprinter? Depends on how big it is it's chasing you, know? Life isn't a sprint. Life is a marathon. And I can be honest, I don't even like to run, short distance or long distance. I always said if God wanted me fast, He'd have made me a cheetah. And I'm not a cheetah. But life is a marathon. But there's some important points here. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. So it's a race, it's a competition. Against who? Are we against each other? We're going to look at some of those in a second. We're not racing against each other. 2 points that need to be brought out. That's the first one. The second one is, this race does not determine my salvation. This isn't a works-based faith for salvation. We've seen, and we're going to see in verse 2, Jesus Christ is the author and finisher of our salvation. We don't run this race to get to the finish line being salvation. That's already been provided for us. Okay? But there's some important points here. So you use the picture of a race. And you want to do well. You want to finish the race. Do you put on the biggest, heaviest backpack you can get to run this race? No. It's so obvious, it's almost silly. But yet, how easily, how quickly in our Christian life do we encumber ourselves with these burdens? And the weight really means a burden. A burden meaning something that you put on and you carry. Do we have a lot of burdens? And it says here, we're to get rid of them. And I'm going to say, without hesitation, this is not easy. I remember when I went on my first Dull sheep hunt back in 1996. My brother. And I was a lot younger, and I was in a lot better shape. I was cutting logs every day, high on a mountain. I felt I didn't even do one day of training to get in shape. I said, I'm ready to go. But he told me, to start with, he said, you better not have more than 40 pounds. And this is 10 days. 40 pounds. And he said, here's the tendency that we all do. Well, this only weighs a few ounces. Throw it in the backpack, right? This only weighs a few. And pretty soon, he goes, ounces make pounds, and pounds get you in trouble. He said, if it weighs more than 40 pounds to start with, you're in trouble. And there's a good reason for that. When we hunted, just the two of us, we both killed a Dall sheep. And we were 18 miles in the wilderness. And he said, I said, how are we getting out of here? And he said, no lifeline. He said, we're going to put it on your back and we're going to walk. And he's 11 years younger than me, and he always has to prove that he's tougher. I said, go ahead, kill yourself. I said, I know where I'm going and I'm going to get there. But when we got back to the flight service, back to Cordova, I had 104 pounds and he had 112. And we carried him for 18 miles. And he said, if you have more than 40 pounds, you'll never make it. And we threw some things out. You get to the point where, I don't need this anymore. I'm not carrying this any further. Throw it out. And we had a goal in mind. We had to get to that airstrip. But in life, we encumber ourselves with the same things. And pretty soon, we're going to get to the point where it's too heavy for us to run this race effectively. It's interesting that he, the author of Hebrews, makes a distinction here between these weights and sin. There's a distinction. Not everything that slows us down is sin. We have to determine. So, go to 1 Corinthians, chapter 11, chapter 10. And I have it here. Kind of talks about this. Very familiar verse. Probably a familiar passage. Paul writes 1 Corinthians, and he writes 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23, all things are lawful, which means legal, which means I have the permission to do it. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. What's expedient? Profitable, good for me. I mean, I have the legal right, can we say, to do these things. And in the context, he's saying there are no scriptural parameters that say you can't do this. There are some things that are legal for us to do. But they're not the best choice. They're not expedient. They're not good for me. Goes on. All things are lawful for me, same statement, but all things edify not. What's it mean to edify?
Build up.
To build us up, to encourage us, to strengthen us for the battle, for the race. I can do them. Here's a statement about that one. Oh, what's the big deal? I've had people tell me that. What's the big deal? You're making too big a deal out of this. Well, is it the best choice you can make? It goes on. In the same context, verse 24. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. It says, the word wealth shouldn't be there, but it says every man seek another. So back to our race. We're not in a competition. What should we be doing in this race even? finishing, but even more, well, finishing is our ultimate goal. We'll get to that in verse 2. But what should we be doing? Helping the others along the way. Don't get so focused that we forget about everybody else on the race. Help them out. I'll tell you a story from the Special Olympics. You know what the Special Olympics are for handicapped kids? I read this in the Reader's Digest several years ago. Well, there's a Special Olympics, 100-meter race, okay? And they lined them up, fired the gun, and they took off. Okay, and 20 yards or 20 meters down, one of the kids fell down. Got hurt. Started crying. And one by one, everybody else in that race stopped. Looked back. Everybody turned around. Went back to that fallen child. Helped her up. All of them linked arms together. And they all finished the race. That's what it means. We don't leave the guy behind who's hurting or stumbled or fell. We go back and we help him out. So I don't have to, and you're right. You don't have to. But that's what it means to being in the race together. We don't leave them behind. Don't put your blinders on and forget about everybody else. The next point about that, in chapter 11, we have all these great examples. And humans being humans, we like to elevate people and put them on a pedestal. But who should stay on the pedestal? Go to verse 2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Author and finisher. What's an author? What's the word mean? The creator of our faith, the starter, the originator. Whose plan was it? In the mind of God, God's originated this plan of salvation. In the person of Jesus Christ. We've looked at that in Hebrews. He is the atonement, chapters 7, 8, and 9. He is the atonement once for all for the sins of all people. Without Jesus, there is no salvation. And the cross finished that. What did he do on the cross? Whose sin nailed him to the cross? Mine. And we have to think of it that personally. Well, it was a wicked word. And it was, but it was my sin that nailed him to the cross. And the cross, according to chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, destroys what? Sin, death, the devil, and it gives us victory. He finished our salvation, meaning there's nothing more that I can do to get my salvation. Jesus did it all. My favorite, certainly one of my favorite, I can't say my very favorite, but his song is Jesus Paid It All. Everything. He didn't leave one little bit out, he paid it all. That's the author and the finisher of our salvation. But continue. Who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. Now, maybe a good Easter passage, Good Friday passage, but it's here. There was nothing about the cross that was fun. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night he was betrayed, we all know the prayer. What did he pray? If it's entirely any way possible, I'll paraphrase, don't let me do this. Keep me from doing this. Did Jesus know what was about to happen? Absolutely. Did he know, clearly understand what it was all about? He knew the finished work, but he knew what he was going to endure was going to be We use the unbearable. Humanly speaking, most people, convicted Roman, what's my word? Subjects, prisoners, most people did not even live what Jesus went through. Most people did not even live to get to a cross. Scourging killed them. The beatings he endured killed them. But it says here, Jesus, well, it was set before him. God's plan, that plan of salvation. He had to endure it. So, well, he knew he was going to come through. Okay? He knew the plan, but that did not alleviate the pain. It's kind of like saying, the doctor says, oh, you need a surgery. And those of us, some of us, that have had surgeries, they hurt. It's kind of like saying, oh, yeah, it'll be great. But it's the enduring way through it to get to that point where it's great. Jesus had to endure that. Endure means a determined effort. Same word that's used in verse 1, it's patience, but it's the same word, endurance. How do you finish a race? How do you finish that marathon? How do you finish? One time in my life I ran a cross-country race, and to be honest, that was one more than I wanted to, but I was forced into it. 3 miles cross-country. How do you endure it? One step at a time. Bob does what kind of races do you do with your son? Spartan. So if you ever look at those on YouTube, they're crazy people. So, how do you endure it? There's a finish line. Keep going. Jesus knew what the end result was going to be, but it was still incredibly painful and hard for him to do it. It goes on. Despising the shame. Okay. It's one thing, I said this before too, it's one thing to suffer when you're guilty, right? If you did it, suffer the consequence. But it's different when you're innocent. And the phrase is, well, that's not fair. Okay. Keep it in context. Jesus was completely innocent. Could he have said, this isn't fair? And it wasn't fair. In any way, shape, or form. That's what part of what the word shame means. To be disgraced. To be mocked. To be made fun of. Especially when you don't deserve it. He endured that. And here's the end. Did he finish? Is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Who is that spot, particular spot reserved for? Someone who's victorious. In the old ancient Roman system, government, when you were the general sent out to do battle, and you were victorious, and you came back to Rome, the Caesar set you down at his right side, showing that you were the victorious general. You've won. That's where Jesus sits, at the right hand of God. It's that place of extreme honor, and it is reserved for only one person, and that's Jesus Christ himself. What more do we need? He's provided everything for salvation, and when time and life gets tough, and we have all these examples from chapter 11, who do we focus on? Kim sent me a text message this week that's completely pertinent here. Philippians 4:13 says what?
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. What gets us through those tough times?
Jesus.
Our faith in Jesus Christ. Go back to Romans. Chapter 8. When you think of chapter 8, everybody wants to go to verse 28. I'm going to go to verse 18. Paul writes again, he says, "For I reckon that the suffering of this present time," the persecutions, the tough times, the things that we're going to be put through, the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. A little different perspective, isn't it? Is life hard? Is life tough? When we get in situations that challenge or question, whatever you want to say, question our faith, what keeps us going? Our faith in Jesus. Number one, He's provided the salvation for my soul. And number two, He has endured more than I've endured. And He kept on. Is anything too tough for us? Is anything, can anything destroy your faith? And maybe I'm weird, but whatever. I've thought of that question a lot. And we live in a persecution-free society. Nobody has thrown a rock at me or beat me or done anything physical harm to me because I'm a Christian. They've called me a few names. And my smart mouth usually says something like, well, I've been called worse by better people, so it doesn't bother me. But we don't know what it means to suffer. But is there anything, use your imagination. Is there anything that would destroy your faith? That's one of those weights or those sins that we've got to throw off. Look to Jesus. Keep your focus there. Verse 3. "For consider Him," Jesus, "that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself, to be accused unjustly, without cause, without crime, and suffer. Not fair, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds." Galatians chapter 6 talks about that too. And I had another reference, I can't remember what it was. Yeah, it is Galatians 6. Galatians 6. And it's familiar as well. And I know it's here somewhere. I'll get to it. One more page. "Be not deceived. God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap." We know that. "He that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. He that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." Verse 9, "And let us not be weary in well-doing." What's it mean to be weary? Tired. Tired not just physically. It means to be tired mentally, emotionally. It means to be exhausted. It means to be at your limit. It means to be at that point where you say, I can't take one more step. I'm done. Spent. "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." It talks about patience and it talks about endurance. And I want to, you have to appreciate in Scripture that they paint a complete truth. Nowhere does it say it's all going to be easy and roses and downhill. Okay? Downhill as opposed to uphill. Nowhere. Life is going to be hard, especially when we desire to live by faith and please God. We're going to And we should expect opposition and persecution for that. We have to keep going. Weary. Weary and faint in your minds. Maybe it was Paul was talking about how much more your body can endure when your mind wants to quit. Was that you talking to me? When your mind says, I'm done, physically, you have a lot more to give, right? But we play these battles in our mind. Part of those weights, give them up. Focus on Jesus in the end. Did he endure it? Can we endure it? Not without faith in Jesus. That's what gets us through. Verse 4. Back to the context of Hebrews. It says, you have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Makes a complete reference to being persecuted to the point of death. Nobody in the book of Hebrews died for what they believed. Chapter 10 gave us a list of some of the things they endured. And it's not making light of those things. But he's trying to put it into perspective. What's important? I asked the question a few minutes ago about what instance or situation could destroy your faith. But maybe I'll go, what can you live without? What do you really need? And I know I'm no different. We're surrounded with an abundance of material goods, and they make life easier, right? But what do we really need? And sometimes we're overdone, overindulged maybe, with material goods that we don't really need. We think they're needs at the moment. And they're completely helpful or handy. Right? But do we really need them? He, the author of Hebrews, is trying to get us to evaluate our Christian life, our Christian race. I could ask, and I get a unanimous, do we all want to be successful in our Christian life? Absolutely. If you don't, you shouldn't even be here. Can I be any more honest? But we encumber ourselves with so much stuff that it makes us hard to live that life. That's what he's saying. How do you run? Some of the choices are hard. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 26, Paul talks about running a race without any purpose. Or boxing, the word is beating the air. What good does it do? Sometimes we confuse, I'm trying to be careful, but sometimes we confuse activity with progress. Boy, I'm busy. But is it the right busy? Or are we just beating the air thinking, boy, I'm going, but we're not accomplishing anything? Sometimes we have to reevaluate our whole purpose. Oh, I'm in the race. But sometimes we're so distracted, we're not really making any progress. And unfortunately, and we're going to see that in the next chapter, or the next lesson in chapter 5, sometimes God has to get our attention. And it's not always pleasant. If you're a parent and have had kids, you can relate to that. Tell them, no, don't do it. And in their stubbornness, they keep doing it. And sometimes you got to get their attention, right? And we're no different as a child of God. Sometimes we're going, or we think we're going. Good illustration is Jonah. He was moving, right? But he wasn't moving the direction God wanted him to go. And sometimes, hopefully you don't get swallowed by a fish, especially in Montana. That wouldn't be good, right? But God's going to do something to get your attention. He is not going to let a child of God go their own way forever. So how's your race? Where are you? I can honestly say I'm a lot closer to the end now, at this age, than I was a few years ago, right? But it's not over. There's not a pit stop for us older people to say, "Whew, I need a break." You got to keep going. The race is set before us. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8, which is the last words that Paul ever wrote. It says, "I have finished my course. I fought a good fight. I finished my course." And what's the last phrase? I kept the faith. Hopefully we can make that, not Paul as our example, but make that statement our own. I'm running. I'm doing the best I can. I might not be as fast as I used to be, but I'm still going. Hopefully, with Jesus as my example and my goal, I'm going to get there. I'm going to finish. Run well. That's what Paul's saying. Run well. Do your best. And I'm out of time. I'm going to close. If you have a comment, I'll let you make a comment, or a statement, or a question. All right, let's pray together. Father,